Do I have your attention? 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 Do I have your attention?
Is you taking notes?
Alrighty, you guys, so what we have here is 2/3 of a cup of warm evaporated milk, and we've just added 1 packet of fast active yeast. Now, in order for your yeast to rise, you want to make sure that the water is warm, but not too warm. So anywhere between 105 and 110 is the perfect temperature. You don't want it too hot or you'll kill off your yeast. So once you have that done, go on ahead and set that to the side. So what you're going to do now in a separate bowl is add in 1 cup of sugar, 1.5 teaspoons of salt. You're going to add in 5 tablespoons of unsalted butter, melted. And then, of course, we're going to add in the pineapple juice. The pineapple juice is 1 cup, and that was at room temperature. Now, of course, the pineapple juice is what is going to add that Hawaiian flair. And we're going to add a little bit more pineapple juice later on in the recipe, but I'll remind you of that. So what we're doing right now is just slightly mixing it up. That way, some of that sugar can start to dissolve. I don't know why I do it this way. It's kind of just the way I did it. I don't know, honey. But once you start to see that some of that sugar has dissolved, then what you're going to go on ahead and do is get your yeast mixture and then pour that directly into the bowl. A good way to know if your yeast has risen and hasn't been killed off because maybe it was too hot, if you start to see bubbles forming at the top of the measuring cup, that's how you know that you did it great. So that's a good tip. Make sure that you're scraping all of that yeast out of whatever the container is because you're going to need all of it. So the next thing we're going to add is, of course, our flour. Now, this is 5 cups of bread flour. Now, if you want, you can use all-purpose flour, but I would highly advise to just take the time and go on ahead and get yourself bread flour. It honestly does not cost that much more, to be honest with you. So I would just invest in getting it. It's going to make sure that you have a lighter and fluffier roll, which is exactly what you want. Now, as you guys can see, I am gradually adding this in. Number 1, because I'm doing this by hand. If you have a standing mixer, either way, you should still be gradually adding it in, but especially if you're doing it by hand, because of course you're not going to be able to mix it as fast as a machine can. And you want to make sure that your rolls are nice and smooth. So you want to make sure that your bread dough comes out nice and smooth. And this, adding it in little by little, will definitely help that. And as you guys may or may not be able to tell, it looks like it's going to be a watery mess, but I promise you, once we add in that last batch, this is going to take on a completely different texture. Now, I will definitely say right now, this dough is going to appear as if it is a very sticky and very loose dough. There's a few things that you're going to be able to do in a few moments that's going to help alleviate any issues, with the dough being too sticky. The first thing that I would suggest, though, which I don't know if you guys can tell at this current moment, is that I'm using a silicone spoon. Now, the reason why I'm using that is because wooden spoons hold heat, and the warmer that spoon gets, the more that dough is going to become more and more stickier, and it's just going to stick to the spoon, and it's just going to become annoying. To where if you use a silicone spoon, honestly, it barely sticks to it, and it does the job perfectly. So once you start to see that your dough is pulling from the side of the bowl nicely, and all of that loose flour has come together, the best thing to do, this is a step that you do not want to skip, is wrap this in saran wrap. You don't have to go touching it or doing nothing. Just wrap it in saran wrap, put a towel over it, and just sit it to the side for about 15 minutes. Allowing this dough to sit for about 15 minutes is going to literally change the entire texture of this bread. It's going to allow it to be 10 times more manageable. I promise you, it really does make a big difference. So once that's set, go on ahead and flour up your surface, but make sure that you don't overdo it. You just need a little bit, because as you guys can see, this dough is now completely manageable. I didn't do anything to it, but now you can see it's not sticky at all. It's completely come together on its own. So, of course, you guys, I am kneading this by hand because I don't have a standing mixer. And honestly, I would suggest if you were new to baking bread, I truly do feel like this is the best way to start by baking bread. I feel like if you start using a hand mixer, then you'll just never know the proper way bread should feel. Like, you can feel it in your hand and know when the bread is ready to go. Also, another way of checking to see if the gluten has fully formed, I think they call it the window painting test. If you're able to pull the bread and pull it as thin as you can, if you're able to see your fingers through the bread without that bread dough ripping, that means the gluten has worked. If it rips, that means you need to keep on going. Now, I ended up needing this for, I say, about 15 minutes. I just set a timer. And as you guys can see, I'm only adding in very, very tiny amounts of flour. Do not get out of control with adding too much flour. And the reason why I say that is because the more flour you add, you guys, the more kneading you're going to have to do. So you want to alleviate all of that by just adding just enough to get you through this process. It's going to seem like the dough is sticky, but I promise you, all you need is just a tiny bit. This dough is very, very forgiving. So, just keep that in mind. In a few moments here, I should be doing the window. Here it is right here. So you see how I pulled that apart and it ripped? That means it wasn't ready. So you're just going to keep on kneading it and keep on kneading it. If you have a standing mixer, of course, you don't have to go through any of this, and you could whip out this recipe, like 10 minutes flat. It'd be just that simple. But of course, like I said, I'm doing it by hand. So once you've gotten that done, you want to go on ahead and get yourself a bowl. And to that bowl, make sure it's a glass bowl, you guys. You're going to add about 2.5 tablespoons of olive oil. And then you're going to add your dough to that bowl. And the reason why you're going to add that oil is because you don't want this to dry out. Now, as far as the timing for this dough to rise, it honestly depends on what the temperature inside of your house is. If you have a warm house, honestly, this bread could double in size within 45 minutes to an hour. If your house is cold like mine, I literally had to wait for this to rise overnight. So it truly will just depend. But a little tip, if you put it inside the oven and wrap it up and put a pot of boiling water next to it, that'll help the dough rise. So that's just a little tip. But once your dough has risen or doubled in size, you're going to put it out on your surface and then you're going to cut it into fours. As you guys can see, I'm just using a regular old knife. I don't use a pastry knife because ain't nobody got time to be buying all that stuff. I just don't have the time. So once you cut it in fours, you're going to take one of those and you're going to cut it in half. And then you're going to take that smaller piece and then you're going to cut it in half again. So technically you should end up with about 15 rolls total. It kind of just depends on, if you doubled or tripled this or whatever size pan you plan on baking these in. But as you can see, you just take that one piece, cut it in half again. So the way to shape your rolls is all I do is simply fold it onto itself and then I pinch it at the bottom, kind of like a little balloon. And then I'm literally just tucking and pinching, tucking and pinching, tucking and pinching. That way you can make sure that it is going to be nice and smooth. Don't start rolling it around in your hand or, on the surface, because all that's going to do is make it tough. At this point, you just want to get into the shape and then be done with it. You don't want to get, out of control. So once again, like I said, all I'm doing is literally rolling it onto itself and then tucking and pinching. Now, I will say, depending upon what type of baking dish that you're going to be baking these in, I'm going to be using a ceramic dish. So it's pretty non-stick. I tend to not really have any issues with sticking that much. But if you're going to be using something that you already know in advance, stuff always sticks to it, get yourself some parchment paper. It'll save you the headache. Trust me, because you don't want these to stick in the pan. And also, if you do use parchment paper, you can then remove them out easily, and then they won't continue to cook once you take them out of the oven. So what we're doing right now is we're adding on an egg wash, and that's just to help them brown over nicely. You don't want to add butter on them, you guys. Do not put butter on them before you put them in the oven. If you do, they are going to completely burn. So don't do it. Just use 1 egg. That's more than enough. So once you put your egg wash on these, what you're going to do is you're going to cover them in saran wrap, put a towel over it, and then just sit it to the side and allow them to double in size. Now that honestly at this point should only take maybe about 30 minutes because you'll already have your oven preheated at this point. So if you just sit your baking dish on top of wherever your oven is, that heat surrounding the oven will help this process. So don't even stress. But the reason why you want to do that is so that you can end up with nice fluffy rolls. You want to make sure you have your oven preheated at 375 degrees. Now, of course, depending upon, how great your oven is, this could take anywhere between 20 to 25 minutes for your rolls to bake off. So what I like to do is I set the timer for 15 minutes and then I check them every 3 minutes after that. Because sometimes the rolls, they want to brown off quicker. Sometimes they want to brown off slower. That kind of, it really truly depends on the type of oven that you use. So for this particular recipe, it took maybe roughly about 22, 23 minutes. I like to take mine out when they are nice and brown. I don't like for mine to be too dark because then they'll just burn. But as you guys can see, they came out so beautifully soft and luscious. I mean, they honestly will melt in your mouth. So the next thing you want to do is add my little concoction I like to call. And what that is a half a stick of Kerrygold butter. You're going to add in 2 tablespoons of pineapple juice and about a half a tablespoon of honey. Mix that up all together, and that's what I'm brushing on the top of these rolls right now. And my God, on today, I'm telling you, these babies turned out beautifully, you guys. And adding that fresh pineapple juice towards the end of this will actually help bring out more of that Hawaiian kind of flavor. But yeah, they turned out absolutely luscious. I want to show you guys what the inside of one of them looks like. They're so extremely soft. They're absolutely delicious. I want to thank you guys so much for tuning in today. I truly hope that you guys try out this recipe because they turned out absolutely divine. I mean, you can see how light and fluffy and airy they are on the inside. But look, thank you guys once again for tuning in. And as always, y'all babies stay cute and take care. Bye, guys.
Simply Food by TY.